Well, Taya, first of all, thank you so much for being with us. And I know you have a very busy schedule with everything going on, and to fit some time in for us to talk to you, we really appreciate it. So a lot of our people are probably familiar with your story because they've either read the book or they've seen the movie. But tell us kind of how your love story began with you and Chris.
It's been a beautiful journey, really, when I look back, and it does actually start with faith, so it's a perfect way to start this. But I really had this notion I was going to move out to Southern California. I had my degrees from college and a great job waiting for me. I bought a condo. I thought, I'm going to live this independent life, and I'm going to need nobody and no man. And just, it wasn't too much longer after I kind of made that statement to myself that I really felt like life was kind of beating me down. And I started to come to the realization that I really felt like I'm not meant to walk this road alone. And I remember praying to God, and I remember I just was praying fervently and was very vulnerable. I just remember being very raw and just saying, it's like, I get it. I feel like I'm listening to you and that you're telling me I'm not supposed to be alone, and I've been very hard-headed. So I said, just send me someone nice. And I remember specifically saying, I don't care what they look like, I don't care the age, I don't care what they do for a living, just nice. And I really felt that God knew that in my heart it also meant good, pure. It wasn't too much longer that I met Chris. And what struck me most that night was that he was the nicest, most pure-hearted person that I think I had ever met in just that first few minutes of just sensing something about him. He was just the real deal. And, it started from there, and I learned so much more about my faith in my life with him.
Right. So just to fast track a little bit, you guys get married, and it's hard enough. Marriage is difficult enough as it is, but he's going overseas, you're a military wife. Talk a little bit about just how you worked on the marriage.
It was such a difficult and powerful thing in my life because I couldn't have imagined somebody more amazing than him. And he was so different. I think that just to add on to that a little bit, I remember him saying to me one time, it was one of the most romantic things I think I'd ever heard, but he said, if God had asked me to design the perfect woman, I couldn't have dreamt of somebody like you. And so starting out that way, I think, was really important for me because I would have done anything to keep it. It was just different. As we went along, and Chris, he had his deployments, and we knew that the divorce rate for Navy SEALs was over 95%, I think, at that time. I knew that was a statistic, but I just believed there was no way that was going to be us.
Right.
So as time went on, I think life has a way of changing things sometimes, and what I realized is it doesn't change your core character normally. He came back with a lot of wounds, I would say, emotional sort of scars, and I changed too because I had this vision and this dream of this amazing partnership. I think I felt I would rely on him more, and then when he was gone, I couldn't rely on him. But I think the pivotal moment for me, I read the book Daughters of Sarah, and women really are capable of kind of ruling the world and all of that stuff, and we can do a million amazing things, but at the end of the day, God created man in marriage one way and woman a different way, so that when they're together, my dad always said you don't have to follow the Bible to get to heaven, but it is a recipe for happiness. And I realized that was true with relationships. We can do all of those things, but when we decide to be married, if we can just submit to the fact that God made man he needs respect. So whether you want them to need it or not, they need it. And while women sometimes, I think we can think we need respect, the need in us, the God-given need, the craving, is really to be cherished. That's really more than even respect. When you give a man respect, what I learned is you get all this back in a man that cherishes you, and once you do that and you make that decision truly in your heart to do that, your marriage will change in 24 hours. And it's true. When we say I do, we're supposed to be saying you're it, you're the only one till death do us part. A part of our society now, I think, is that we accept divorce readily, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing for people that are in abusive situations. I think it's great. But if you truly look at your marriage and you say, this is the only one I've got, it is like a pair of shoes. And a pair of shoes, if we said, this is your one pair of shoes, the only one you'll have for the rest of your life, what would you do with those shoes? I mean, you wouldn't just say, I've got shoes, I'm fine. You would say, okay, these are my shoes. If there's a start to a hole, I'm going to patch it. If they start to get run down, I'm going to fix it. Because that's the only pair you'll ever have, and you need them. And I think sometimes if we would look at our marriage a little bit that way, more that way, and say, this is the only one I'll ever have. And if it starts to get a little bit roughed up or a little scuffed, I want to I want to put the effort into fixing it and making
Right.
it perfect, because it really is your foundation too.
Right.
I mean, it can be the most beautiful thing in your life if you let it.
So true. Okay, well, let's talk about this. Here's this individual that you feel like God has given to you, and he feels the same way. And then tragedy strikes and he's gone.
Right.
What does that do to your faith? What do you think about God after that, when you were so happy with what he'd given you and now he
Right.
seems to take it away?
Right. I look back too, and I can see how God prepared me from the time I was a kid to what's been my biggest struggle to date, and that is losing Chris. I remember a few things. One is, starting out as a young kid, my cousin was killed at 3 years old in a random accident, and there was nothing my aunt could have done. You know, it was a freak thing, and I remember at about 10 years old knowing that that happened. I remember my aunt saying the thing that she had learned most is that there is no fair.
Yeah.
And it's not like if you just do the right things that you can make it all work out. I think the bigger question, and this could go back to my aunt as well, with Chris and Chad's murder, people can think, well, why would a loving God allow that to happen? And I think because the loving God I know makes promises and he keeps them. And the promise he made was that we have free will. And he didn't say, I only give free will to those who will do good with it. He gives it to people who choose to do evil.
Right.
And the person who killed my husband and his friend chose to do evil. And I believe that God could sit there and say, I'm not going to break my word, but I know what this man's going to do.
Right.
And I look back and I can see ways that he blessed me and that he blessed Chris. And I can see that even with that man's free will to do evil, he has brought thousands and thousands and thousands more beautiful moments through even their death than anything else. And that's him keeping his promise to say, evil will occur, but if you'll open your eyes to it, I will bring more beauty through even tragedy.
So our topic that we're talking about this weekend is, I'm afraid for my loved ones, and for many of us, that's our greatest fear. And I know for many years that was your greatest fear while Chris was overseas, and now he comes back and then this happens.
Right.
You lived through it. Talk about just the grief process, and for those who have gone through something like that or will go through something like that, how did God kind of not only walk with you, but bring others along to help you through that?
Right. It's a great question. When we lost some of our friends and I would watch those widows go before me, and I had this powerful, powerful realization and heavy weight on my shoulders that those women were living my worst fear. And I would go and I would hold their hand, I would cry with them, I would cry for them. And I was very aware that the world just kept spinning. And I remember thinking how tragic and how horrible and how real that is.
Right.
That happens every day to numbers and numbers and numbers of people. I remember when I found out that Chris had been killed, and I just thought, here we go.
Yeah.
Because I knew I'd already seen it. I'd already seen it, that the world was going to keep going, and I better get tough. But I know God is loving because I see the ways that he blessed us tremendously before Chris was killed. I saw prayers that were answered and things that were taken care of beforehand. And I believe it's because he knew what the choices of somebody else's free will were going to be, and he blessed us. I knew I would survive. And God has continued to put people in my life at just the right time. I have this peace about me now, kind of knowing that it will be okay even if I don't know how. And when I have those feelings that I think everybody has, the anxieties, the worries, just as much as it's scary to think we don't have control, it can be comforting to say you don't have control. You don't. So why worry and why fret? And when you start out like I did, very fearful of a lot of things, very anxious, my fear would manifest itself in different ways. I would sleep with the lights on in my bedroom, even though I knew it made no sense to do that. And I just was so afraid that I couldn't get my head around it. I was scared when the man would eat bacon. I was scared that he was going to have high cholesterol and get a heart attack, have a heart attack. If he'd go to fast food too much, if he didn't wear enough sunscreen, I thought he was going to die of skin cancer, And I just realized never once was I afraid that he would go to help somebody and be murdered in cold blood with his friend. It's, what's the point?
Right.
And even worrying about him dying when I look back, it didn't bring joy to our life. And I thought, how when you have your kids, especially when they're young and they're inquisitive, let's say you're going on a trip, and they'd say, Mom, did you pack enough food? Well, what are we going to eat? I don't know. Well, am I going to have friends there? Well, what am I going to do? Well, whatever it is, they go on and on and on, right? And at some point as a parent, you can answer the question. At some point, you're going to say, honey, I've got this. I'm the adult. Trust me, okay? You're fine. Just trust me. Go play. I had this epiphany the other day. thinking God is doing the same thing to me sometimes. And I'm like, God, how's it going to go? What's going to happen? Please show me the right way. Well, what if this happens? Well, what if that happens? You know, those nights where you are laying awake. And I imagine God is saying, honey, I've got this. Trust me. And for me, it's really important, the last part of that, which is I think God saying, go play. I've given you this great life to enjoy. I've told you have no fear. I've told you that you're supposed to enjoy every day and not worry about tomorrow.
Right.
Go do that.
Let me ask you about, for somebody out there walking with somebody else going through grief, what advice would you give them?
One of the things about grief is that there's no textbook really. I mean, there are a lot of books on it, but there's no guideline of how exactly you grieve. It's one of the most unpredictable things I've ever lived through. It's also a really individual journey. I remember talking to a mother one time, and she had lost her adult son, and she was saying sometimes she's afraid to look like she's enjoying something for fear that other people might think that she didn't love her son, which is so sad because nobody's with you in the middle of the night. You got to laugh somewhere and have a good time at something, because it doesn't mean that the next minute you're not going to have to deal with that heavy weight of grief. I just feel like we all need to be careful in making judgments on people who are grieving, because it is traumatic and it's hard, and some of us can try to outrun it for a while and just power through, and some of us are going to say, I have to do it all right now 100% so that I can move forward in the future. But it's an individual journey for sure.
Okay, I have one last question for
Yeah.
you. For those of us that, we see veterans, we might even have people in our family that served, or all first responders. How do we adequately thank them? How do we, appreciate them in a way that matters in a significant way to them?
Yeah, you know what, that's a great question, and I can tell you that I remember feeling intimidated to go up to a veteran sometimes and say thank you, because I didn't know what their reaction would be. And I watched Chris do it a number of times. Nobody knew who he was, and he didn't say he served. He would just go up to somebody and thank them for their service. And I saw a number of times people get teary and say that was the first time they'd ever been thanked. And I thought, when you're bringing a grown man to tears because you just said thank you for your service and nothing else, that tells you how much they probably needed it and how much it still hurts. Of the suicides, people hear that number 22 a day. Veterans are killing themselves every day in this country. And like 70 to 80% of those are Vietnam veterans today. And so what that tells me is that they came back to a country that didn't have gratitude. I mean, these guys, they don't say, okay, I will go to war if you're going to a war I approve of. Or if we go to a country I think we should go to, I'll serve. They just say, hey, I'll go, you send me. And so it's just saying thank you, and sometimes it'll be awkward because sometimes they don't know what to say back. Try to just set aside their response, because it does, I promise you, it means something to them no matter how they respond, or if they look at the floor or say nothing or just nod their head, it means something. The other side of that, I would say, you asked me what specifically can you do? And I think God gives us all these different talents. Some of us can write really well, some can sing, some are physically more capable than others, and whatever your gift is, I think you bring it to the table. A guy, when we were in California, our neighbors, they had a landscaper, they were a little bit older, so instead of getting their yard mowed every week, they sent their gardener to my house every other week. And so they didn't change the price that they paid, they just said their yard wasn't going to be as pristine. Every other week they would do that for me while Chris was deployed. It's things like that. I mean, if you have money, buy them a meal. If you see them out, anonymously take care of their meal. But I don't think they ever expect anything. I really don't. They're there. They want to serve.
Right.
It's their choice to do it. But it's sure nice when people thank them for it, I think.
That's great.
Yeah.
And thank you, not just for today, but for your sacrifice and for his service.
And it was truly an honor to do it with him. He loved it. Yeah. He really did.